Terrific. While they get seated, I will introduce the moderator for this panel, Professor Madeline Kass, who's a visiting professor at UC Law School in San Francisco, a distinguished scholar in residence at Seattle University School of Law, and a professor emeritus at Thomas Jefferson School of Law. Madeline is also a 2019 Fulbright Scholar and a 2022 International Social Science Research Global Scholar, and has held visiting appointments in Belgium, Scotland, and Italy, and is active in the American Bar Association's section on energy, environment, and natural resources, where she has chaired both the biodiversity and international environmental and resources law committees. A quick personal plug, Madeline and I are currently co-authoring a forthcoming book called Biodiversity Laws in the United States and the European Union, a comparative analysis, which is under contract with Elgar Press. So with her global perspective and deep expertise in environment and natural resources law, she is the perfect person to moderate today's panel on change. So with that, Madeline, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Temple. That was super nice. And even before that nice intro, I was going to say nice words about you. I want to thank Temple. This has been an incredible conference, bringing together exceptional speakers with incredible knowledge, and also a group of really wonderful people who I hope to continue to be in contact with after. And I want to say, Temple, this is the only environmental conference I've ever gone to where I've been brought to tears in various events. So you really pushed us to go a little bit deeper. So this panel continues the afternoon's theme of change. And the session is going to explore how conservation efforts adapt to rapid environmental, social, and economic change across diverse global landscapes. So the panelists for this session were asked to share their insights on managing conservation challenges in the context of shifting pressures, evolving governance, and changing societal values. So our first speaker is Justine Alexander. And Justine is a conservation scientist and the country director for the Wildlife Conservation Society Mongolia program. She holds a Master's of Science in Conservation Science from Imperial College in London and a PhD from Beijing Forestry University, where she researched snow leopards and their conservation in central China. Justine has spent over a decade working across High Asia on snow leopard conservation, including as a past executive director of the Snow Leopard Network. Welcome, Justine.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I want to start by just honoring the indigenous people of this land, who I hope can continue guide the conservation work, and also to all the other conservationists working here. It's really a pleasure to meet you all and learn about the work here. And to the panelists here that have honored to stand next to and share about Mongolia. And also a special thank you to John and Temple for inviting me all the way from Ulaanbaatar, the big city that you saw in John's presentation. I live there, a lovely city, but also, yeah, rapidly changing. So I would like to talk about how we're working in a landscape that we believe is largely intact, unique, but also very vulnerable and of global conservation importance to protect, but also to learn from. So I hope that today we can share, some solutions, but also share about the challenges, and that you can see us as potential an area we can work together and support, but see us as we're going through the same battle together. So Mongolia is found between Russia and China, as Puji, my colleague, shared earlier. And as many of you know, it's around size of Texas, so it's quite a large country, but there's a population density of around 2 people per kilometer squared. So a very low population. Mostly the population is found in Ulaanbaatar, where there's around half of the population there, with the other half in across the pasture of Mongolia. But Mongolia is also a beautiful island, a landlocked country of biodiversity. As you can see here in orange is the Mongolian gazelle. So 99% of the Mongolian gazelle is found in Mongolia. Previously, it was found through further in China and in Russia. There's the hulan, the Asiatic wild ass. 80% is now only found in the Gobi Desert. And then the snow leopard. Mongolia is home to the second most snow leopards in the world after China. So it plays a really important role for these species, but it's undergoing rapid change. As Puji shared, there's over 60 million livestock across the country, but there's also increasing mining. The economy depends on 30% of mining. 90% of mining are exports, primarily gold, copper, coal, and also some rare earths. And with mining is fragmentation of this habitat. New roads, new railways. Every time I go to the Gobi, we see something new. So it's changing really, really fast. And we feel that we're always battling and a little bit slower than the change. And the ecosystem I want to talk about is the Gobi steppe ecosystem. So when you travel there, and you saw the pictures from John, it looks really devoid of biodiversity. It looks really empty and stark. I heard that it's similar to Wyoming. I haven't actually been and seen, but perhaps you go there and you actually don't see much biodiversity. But we say that it has actually Serengeti equivalent of species diversity. Okay, not the same amount of richness as you might see in Kruger or other places of East Africa, but there's a range of different species. There's the hulan, which I shared, which is the Asiatic wild ass. There's the Mongolian gazelle that has some of the most wide-ranging movements of the world. There's the goitered gazelle. And then some of you might be aware of the saiga antelope, one of the most ancient species that used to also occur during the Ice Age in the steppe ecosystem. And of course, there's the mountain ungulates, the argali and ibex, and the charismatic carnivores, the snow leopards, the Pallas cat, even Eurasian lynx that we know very little about in this steppe ecosystem. And there's a functioning prey-predator ecosystem that really still functions, but it needs to function at the landscape level. And why? This is a paper that was published in around 2018. Maybe some of you are aware because I think there's data from Yellowstone as well. And this paper highlighted that from collared data of number of species collared across the world, it's the hulan and the Mongolian gazelle of Mongolia that have the widest ranging movements of the world. So we need to really be working at the landscape level for these species. So the hulan, we've collared around over 70 hulans in the last 10 years in Mongolia with the WCS and partners. And we know now that to protect the population, we have to protect over 100,000 kilometers squared because they move nomadically. And we can't really predict when they're going to move where. They follow the grass, they follow the water, like even traditional nomadic way of life in Mongolia. And then there's the snow leopard. Now, to make sure everyone is awake, can you find it? Where is this snow leopard in this Mongolian South Gobi landscape? Anyone? Please shout out if you see beautiful female snow leopard. She's actually looking back at us. Okay. So there she is. She's looking back at us. So this was a snow leopard that was being collared. That's why she's so close. But it took me over 4 years, having worked on snow leopards 10 years prior, to see a snow leopard in Mongolia because the landscape is very low elevation and they're really camouflaged in their landscape. But we knew that this collared individual didn't actually come from this specific mountain. We could see from her spot pattern, from long-term monitoring, that she came from a neighboring mountain. Because this unique landscape, they have to travel the steppe is these meta populations where they travel the Gobi steppe to actually, when they disperse. It's very similar to the wolves that we heard about yesterday. The snow leopards stay with their mother for around 2 years, and then they might disperse. Or a male may be kicked out of its territory and need to find a new home range, and they're territorial. So when they do that, you see them in these very unusual habitats, the steppe ecosystem between these mountains. And this reminds us that landscape level approaches for even mountain species like snow leopards need to be thought of as steppe and mountain ecosystem, the whole Gobi steppe ecosystem. We cannot just isolate the mountains. Just to give you guys context, I was trying to estimate this morning how many snow leopards could be in Yellowstone if it was suitable habitat for the species. I think I estimate around 10 to 90 individuals. So you can see that they occur at very low densities from 0.05 to around 1 per 100 kilometers squared. So we have to really work at landscape level to also accumulate and take care of the whole population, not just individuals. Snow leopards occur at these kind of elevations in the Gobi steppe ecosystem, the further eastern part of their distribution. But Mongolia is changing fast. This is a picture from the South Gobi last November near our research site. It was a new mine that had just opened north of our research site. And our team, for the first time, already saw traffic of trucks in the night. We would see the lights blaring from our research site. And this is an area that is meant to be very low density of people. But you see now traffic of trucks. So imagine how that's impacting nomadic species and movement of wildlife across this area. It's not only roads, mines. This picture in the Gobi in the south, the red part are exploration licenses. There's also a number of other mines in the area. So outside protected areas are very vulnerable to change. And with those mines come roads, come railways, and where the hulans, the wild ass I talked about before that need hundreds of kilometers squared. In orange was their distribution just 10 years ago. Now we have new railways, just the last 5 years when I've been there, and now their population is already fragmented. The railways are coming now to the snow leopards going west with new roads, and we expect that the snow leopard populations are also going to be fragmented. But snow leopards have a genetic diversity that is less than the cheetah. This was just published last year. So we're really worried about how this is going to affect the population genetically, and also the populations, which ones are source, which ones are sink populations. So we're really worried about these rapid changing environments happening right before our eyes. It's not only fragmentation, there's climate change. As many of you know, Mongolia is known for these extreme events. Maybe some of you know them as Zud. There's these extreme, it's linked to drought and extreme snow in the winter. In 2024, we had over 7.1 million livestock that died. That's 10% of all the herds in Mongolia. Devastating for local people. We also do not know how it impacted local wildlife. No one was counting the Mongolian gazelles and saying, how were they impacted by it? But we do know, because the increasing frequency of Zud, that the resilience of these species are being affected. And we're trying to do more to understand how extreme weather is impacting a lot of these wildlife species. So those pressures I talked about, quick economic development, fragmentation, extreme climate, and of course, degradation with overgrazing, it really makes us ask the question, how can we secure and connect ecosystems at scale that we really need to do? Because that's how this Gobi steppe ecosystem will persist. And one thing that is really encouraging is in Mongolia, there are some strengths. And the strength is that nomadic culture is really valued. It's in the national plans. We really need to value and respect the culture. 1/3 of the population remains nomadic as pastoralists as well. So we can engage with that 1/3 of the population, and they can be really part of the answer and underpin our conservation approaches. And that's what we really try to do with our work. And this is some examples that we're trying to do. We're really trying to move forward to allow free movement of wildlife. The blue is the snow leopard population in the further eastern part of their range. And we're trying to secure corridors between protected areas. How are we doing that? We're trying to rapidly engage local communities so they can get the rights to the land to also support conservation. Mongolia comes from the Soviet era, 1991, became a democracy. So the land remains public land. All of the land is not private to these pastoral communities. They can register their camp, but they can't register their pasture land. So we're helping them secure the rights to these lands so they can help conserve the natural resources. And we've already engaged over 7 different communities in this key corridor, and then linking them with protected area management. Because right now, Mongolia has around 21% of its country covered in protected areas. But we know by 2030, even with 30%, it won't be enough for these other wildlife. So we need to engage these local communities in our conservation action. And what does that mean in practice? Well, we work with local communities, help them get organized together, and then they get registered at local government. They have their own management plans, their own conservation goals that we just facilitate. Maybe it's to protect the sacred mountain, to protect the sacred water areas, and then along with that, the biodiversity. And then they can get local funding from the local government. If they have a structure, if they have a management plan. We had one community get $18,000 from the local government last year. So it doesn't always have to depend on us for funding. And then we support them in patrolling this area. So this is an example of one of our rangers. Her name is Artan Setsek, and she patrols her community area once a month. Not always on camel. She actually uses motorbike most of the time. But she really enjoys and documents the outcomes of the conservation work to show that they're having impact. And this is an example of the patrolling routes using the SMART application that some of you guys might be aware of. And it's not only the local communities patrolling. We try to integrate it with the protected area patrols and also the local government patrols. So in the end, we're covering over 100,000 kilometers squared. So we're covering this landscape. And this is more of a preventive strategy to stop potential illegal killing of wildlife, to stop illegal mining, or so on. So we're really trying to create this prevention and the stewardship of the land with different stakeholders. And this is the corridor I shared earlier of those communities. As I shared before, it's not only about securing habitat, it's also about mobility. And this is a few snow leopards that have been collared over time in the South Gobi. And as you can see, they move between the mountains, the brown areas, and cross the steppe. So we need to protect and allow that movement of the snow leopards from one mountain to the other. One even tried to go to China. I think the border wall prevented it. There's a big fence there, so she came quickly back. What we're trying to do here is prevent these fences. There's increasing number of roads and linear infrastructure along this area. This is a fence between the Chinese and Kazakh border, and as you can see, it's preventing snow leopards moving between the area. They might sometimes be able to climb over, but we know that the other fences are even bigger, and snow leopards don't seem to want to climb over them. So what are we doing? Well, we're working much like here. It's with standards. How can we have better standards on linear infrastructure? And we've had progress with our partners like WWF and the government, and we have now underpass standards for wildlife and also fencing standards for Mongolian gazelles. However, these are not good enough. We're trying to really improve them, monitor their effectiveness, and then try to provide higher standards for the future. We also are trying to not only do standards for underpasses, overpasses, but secure corridors and safe passages. This is an example of hulans, and this is a hulan collard. And as you can see, the only area it could cross the black and white strip, a railway, was at the border. This is a border area that has no fences and is the only area that allows its movement. We're seeing that hulans, because of climate change probably, are moving further east. And they've never really been east of that railway since it was built. And now, though, they're pushing east and trying to access grass over there. So we were managed to get all agencies involved, even border agency, Ministry of Environment, to say, okay, this border, so I'll show again that video. that border area will remain a safe passage for wildlife. And through that effort, we're hoping to keep it open, especially during winter when animals try to move. We're also working to create overpasses, but as some of the other colleagues have talked about today, it's very expensive and takes time. So we're hopefully for the first overpass for Mongolia coming soon. And we confirmed that hulans are now found east of that railway. This was a real success story because they're reestablishing in their historical range, and we hope to increasingly see them in that area. But given they haven't been there for over 50 years, we have to work with communities to accept them to come back. We also believe that these threats and change are becoming increasingly unpredictable. And we're seeing new threats. Even tourism is increasingly becoming unregulated. So we need to deal with that new threat, especially for snow leopards. So how are we doing that? Well, we just created, just a few weeks ago, a snow leopard network for Mongolia. And we're bringing together government, all NGOs, all protected areas, and we're all roaring for snow leopards in this picture, if you're wondering what we're doing, to try to bring different stakeholders together and roar for the species. But the Gobi steppe ecosystem, it's not only in Mongolia, it's also in China. So how do we engage at the multi-country level? Well, we're engaging primarily with the Convention of Migratory Species, which Mongolia is a signatory to. And Mongolia takes this very seriously. They have to report at every meeting. They have to show progress. There are a number of different groups like the Central Asian Mammals Initiative, and we really engage there. And luckily, the Gobi is now one of the priority landscapes for that convention. So we can really harness that and mobilize the government to engage, and maybe even wider than Mongolia, but also China. Now, just to make sure you're all awake again, can you find the snow leopard? Okay, I think some people, it's more obvious here. So now we've moved to China because I wanted to remind you. So there it is in the middle. So this photo, actually, I was out and we were taking pictures. We knew snow leopard was there. We didn't see it. We just saw the blue sheep kind of moving. We came back to camp, looked on our camera, and then we saw the snow leopard. So I didn't actually see it in the wild in this moment, just by the way. But just a reminder that snow leopards are not also just in Mongolia. They're found in 12 different countries of High Asia. So we need to be thinking about these 12 different countries. As we heard from our speaker previously, primarily they're found in border regions. We say 1/3 of the population is predicted to be in these border regions, so we need to be working in multi-country initiatives. Unfortunately, China isn't a member of CMS, so we need to work on other initiatives, and there's the Global Snow Leopard Ecosystem Program that was established in 2018 that brings all 12 countries to the same table. And one thing that's really important for us is also climate change. We predict that in the next 50 years, the distribution of snow leopards will change. This model might not be perfect, but it's a first step, and there's a number of more context-specific models predicting snow leopard habitats. And as you can see, Mongolia is predicted to have more habitat in the future. So we really needed to be working at these border areas where there are fences like this that prevent the snow leopard and it's fragmenting it even more. And we need to be working in these refuge areas, potentially the green areas, where we predict snow leopards will occur more. So I'm just going to close up now. I have 1 second. So I just wanted to highlight that conservation at scale, especially in Mongolia and across High Asia, is really under pressure. We're really seeing that there's unprecedented economic growth, which is great, has opportunities, but it increasingly is also having rapid changes. But I really believe, I'm an optimist, that perhaps snow leopards can help us, at least in the Gobi, along with the hulans and the nomadic ungulates, help us frame it at the landscape level, because if we just frame it looking at protected areas, it's not enough, and that won't be enough in 2030. So I hope that snow leopards can help decision makers get very excited about supporting the work at the landscape level. So thank you very much.
Okay, our next speaker is Benoit Goossens. He is the director of the Danau Girang Field Center in the Lower Kinabatangan Wildlife Sanctuary. Did I totally mangle that? I don't know. In Malaysia, Borneo. I tried. The Field Center is a research and training facility co-managed by the Sabah Wildlife Department and Cardiff University. And at the center, Benoit leads projects on biodiversity responses to habitat fragmentation and degradation. He's also a professor at Cardiff University, a member of the IUCN Species Survival Commission's Asian Wild Cattle, Crocodile, Asian Elephant, and Primate Specialist Groups. And please welcome Benoit.
Thank you, Madeline. Before I start, I would like to warmly thank Temple, John, but also Brent and many others from University of Wyoming for giving me this opportunity to be with you today. I've been so impressed by all the presentations and by all my conservation colleagues, and they inspire me a lot. So today, I'm going to be talking about navigating change, and this presentation is together with the director of the Sabah Wildlife Department, with whom I'm working very closely. And I work on the northern tip of Borneo in Sabah. It's about 7 million hectares, or about 18 million acres. And 53% of the land is still covered by forest, and 26% of this land is totally protected. But you will see that being totally protected sometimes doesn't prevent changes. And I set up a small research center along the Kinabatangan River, which is somewhere here. This is all old palm plantations. Okay. And recently, just a few days ago, the Kinabatangan has been designated as a UNESCO biosphere reserve. So hopefully it's going to help us conserving this very fragile ecosystem. And just to put some perspective, this is the biggest protected area in Sabah, the Tabin Wildlife Reserve, and it's about 7 times smaller than the Yellowstone National Park. So, but it has one of the biggest mammals on the planet, the Bornean elephant. So we have to deal with that kind of wildlife in a much smaller landscape than the one you have here. And I decided to take the Bornean elephant as a model for this presentation. And I'm going to talk about landscape change and also illegal wildlife trade, trafficking and poaching, because it's still going on in Sabah. John showed that map of Borneo and the change. So you can see the the forest disappearing year after year. And just to put you back there, so I'm working here. And I've been working for 25 years in that kind of landscape here. So we've got highly degraded forest next to old palm plantation. And wildlife needs to adapt to that kind of landscape. And so for 20 years, I've been trying to understand how wildlife is responding to that kind of landscape, using different models, including the Bornean elephant, but also the clouded leopard and sun bear, etc. And that kind of landscape as obviously can bring some negative impact. Elephants have to use the old palm plantations. They have to go into it. And so often it can be fatal for them due to long-term poisoning, for example, because by eating old palm leaves, for example, they accumulate heavy metals, such as cadmium, for example. So we have fatalities as well, and we're losing animals due to that agriculture development. But one of the biggest threats that that the elephant is facing is linear infrastructure development. And at the moment, we have this huge project called the Pan-Borneo Highway that is happening in Sabah. And the idea of the Pan-Borneo Highway is to go all this, and that will be surrounding all the protected areas in the forest here, and also fragmenting the forest that is found here and in central Sabah. And I would like to give you an example of what's happening right now. And I was mentioning about protected area. So currently there is an alignment of the Pan-Borneo Highway that is being built. So this is here the current road. And the government is now building a 4-lane highway. And because they faced some issues with the local community who didn't want to expand the road here, they decided to build the road through a totally protected forest reserve here, which is the Tawai Forest Reserve. All these dots are elephant GPS points. So they're currently building a highway through that elephant range. We've been fighting for 7 years, trying to change this and trying to give them alternative routes like these ones here, which would have been going through all palm plantations on the other side of the river and the villages, so they wouldn't have an impact of the population. But no, they decide to go ahead and build that road. And as you know, road can also lead to poaching. And for the past 12 months, we have been facing ivory poaching, so elephant poaching for ivory. 13 elephants in the past 9 months have been beheaded. And this might go even further. So we have been doing a lot of research on elephant for the past 10 years, and I was very active in drafting a state action plan for the Bornean elephant, which is still ongoing. And because that road has been, it's actually, they have started building it, we decided to look at the impact of the road, of the highway on the elephant movement. So together, I mean, with funding from the British Council and a local foundation, Yayasan Hasana, we have set up on elephants in the area before the construction of the road started. And for example, we had a couple of elephants that were colored here. As soon as the road started building here on the 30th of June to 2025, they moved straight away from the road, and now they are roaming here. So they have reacted very quickly. What I expect is that in the future, they will go back here, and they will create massive conflict around the road. So another thing that we have been doing Danau Girang Field Center because of the high level of poaching. We have started developing specialized teams for the Sabah Forestry Department and the Sabah Wildlife Department. And together with the help of a local foundation, the Sime Darby Foundation, and also your government, the Department, the United States, the Department of State, with the Bureau of Narcotics and International and Law Enforcement Affairs, we have set up different specialized teams. And the first one is Protect Unit. It's a team of 50 rangers coming from the local community, 40 men and only 2 women. Sorry, the Black Mambas. We're going to try to do better. And they are patrolling the forest reserves all around Sabah. And what we also did, thanks to your government, is to set up an intelligence unit, basically responsible for gathering information, doing covert operations, and undercover operations. At the moment, the team is working hard on this gang of ivory poachers, and we are getting very close to catch them. We know who they are, but because of the law, we need to catch them with the elephant head or anything. And then we have also set up a forensic unit for the Sabah Wildlife Department. So we have specialized forensic scientists that we trained. They are locals from Sabah. They're employed by Danau Girang Field Center. And we set up a forensic lab for the Sabah Wildlife Department. And the forensic officers are certified, and they can go to court and present the cases. And then the last team that we set up is a rapid response team. So the intelligence unit is gathering the information and then is providing that information to the rapid response team. After this meeting, I'm thinking of maybe changing the name to the King Cobras. But these guys are then sent to arrest poachers, because obviously the intelligence unit, you cannot see their face. So then we're sending the Sabah Wildlife Department is sending the rapid response team to arrest poachers. So fingers crossed, we will get those fuckers. So the lessons that we learn from all this work is that we really need to work hand in hand with the government as a united front, together also with NGOs. We cannot do anything without the government. We have to work with them. My office is at the Sabah Wildlife Department headquarters. I have access to the director and to the different officers on a daily basis. It's extremely important. We also need to work with the drivers of land use changes, such as the planters, the communities. So we work very closely with the old palm plantations, trying to, provide solutions to facilitate the movements of wildlife through the old palm estates. Very importantly, also, we need to develop and promote interagency work. And that's what we try to do with the intelligence unit, is that they are working very closely with the different enforcement agencies, the police, the maritime police, the customs, the fisheries, the wildlife department, forestry department, Sabah Park. So all these organizations are working very closely together, and we set up the Wildlife Crime Bureau. And finally, we need to strengthen manpower and use also technology whenever possible. So we use drone, So the rapid response team and the intelligence unit are using drone, real-time cameras, real-time audiomorphs, so that we can, they can also provide information to the wildlife department. So I'm really on time. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, our next and the final speaker for our panel is Susan Clark. And Susan has worked in North America, Australia, Asia, and Central America on diverse field projects. And she's written numerous books, including one I picked out titled Yellowstone Survival, A Call to Action for a New Conservation Story. She's taught at the Yale School of the Environment, which I know because I was a student of hers, but I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was. Susan's goal is to improve conservation of species and ecosystems at professional, scientific, organizational, and policy levels. And she seeks to be an integrator of knowledge and action, and thereby helping people to practically solve important problems.
So thank you for that. First of all, I should tell you, I'm coming down with something. So I'm operating on about 3 cylinders here. So please overlook the glitches. The second thing I want to do is thank John and other folks who are involved in setting this conference up. And I want all the speakers from other countries talking about their cases to know that we really appreciate your practical experience. And lastly, I want to acknowledge the really quality of student presentations we heard last night. So thinking about trying to wrap the conference down to the final panel, I want to try to start a different kind of discussion that's kind of at the meta level, that cuts across all the presentations and a lot of things said. And I'm going to play off of what Todd Wilkinson said yesterday, and especially what Bob Keiter said today. So I'm going to use the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem to surface some really important issues. So one way to think about what's going on everywhere, we're getting better and better. Superintendent Jenkins' yesterday presentation was about how things are getting better and better in his lifetime. Well, at the same time, things are getting worse and worse. So we need to deal with those too. We need to accelerate how to get things better and minimize how things are getting worse. So what I want to do is give a bit of a functional discussion, look at how things work. It's not about the things themselves. Like ecosystems function in a certain way, but we can talk about plants, animals, and water and so forth. I want to talk functionally here, which may be a bit of a new vocabulary. So what I want to do today, I'm in the introduction now. I'm going to have a one slide on my standpoint, like who am I and why am I saying this? I want to ask 2 key questions, and in about 4 slides, try to answer those in part. And those are the same 2 questions all of you are dealing with, no matter where you are. Then in 1 slide, I want to offer a problem definition, which is really another question. Then I want to spend some time talking about what the trade-offs are and what the consequences are that we're making everywhere. Then I want to make 4 recommendations out of 20 I could offer you. Time is limited, and I want to be very brief in all of this. Then a 1 slide conclusion. So part of my thesis is there's a missing conversation. We're all involved in doing really good work, fully engaged at 110%. And everybody I've heard here today alludes to the missing conversation. And that conversation is about the ecological functioning and the trade-off and consequences of these big regions and cases. And the trade-off is between wildlife, nature, and people. That's one way to think about it. And what we're really trying to answer is what is the right relationship among people, wildlife, and nature. We're all struggling to figure that out in our specific locations. I also have a book cover here on future studies. All we know about is what we have known in the past. All of our concerns are about the future, which hasn't occurred and we know nothing about it yet. But we can play off the past and a lot of other things to start filling in the blanks about the future so we can organize and position ourselves to deal with it best so we can get more wins and less losses. So the next slide is one of my central points. So this man was president of the United States on 2 occasions, Dwight David Eisenhower. For those of you who don't know about history, he was the Supreme Allied Commander of all the Allied forces to take Europe back from the Nazis. He was in charge of 2 million men, supported by a vast industrial base, largely the United States. And this was his view, both as president and throughout his lifetime. Whenever I run into a problem I can't solve, I always make it bigger. I never solve it by trying to make it smaller. But if I make it big enough, and I begin to see the outlines of a solution. And my question to you, are we thinking in managing big enough? And my answer is no. So I want to play off this quote as I look at Yellowstone and make various comments. So what do we mean by bigger? How do you be big? What he really means is how to think comprehensively, not selectively. How to think integratively, not in bits and pieces. And how to be forward thinking and looking and operating about the future. That's what he means by big. So I'm going to argue in one way or another, we could really lift our game by being big in that sense. So why am I here talking to you? I've worked in the Yellowstone system for 57 years and a lot of other places, 15 countries and all the continents except Antarctica. And there's a vast amount of literature available, sometimes going back decades, of what we are experiencing now. What we're experiencing now is not new. It's been known that it's coming for a long time. Some of my earlier works, which go back to 1968 in this region, are mainly ecological. The second volume there is a teacher workshop we produced in the 80s on ecosystem conservation. And we taught to public school teachers for many years here in Wyoming. The third document is we tried to pull together a directory of all the organizations in the region, which are several hundred, both government and non-government. And what are they doing? And do they know about each other? So we're trying to integrate here. The next volume, Ensuring Greater Yellowstone's Future, is a study I did for 15 years, studying leadership in the Yellowstone region. What's leadership doing? How are they thinking? What it is, how things work, and what's missing, and how we might do better. The next book is Large-Scale Conservation we did in 2014. I used to teach large-scale conservation at Yale for a dozen years. And it lays the functional foundations for thinking about large-scale conservation. Functional foundation about people and institutions and resources. And the last one I did in 2021, and it took 50 years experience for me to be able to write that. And it took 7 years to write it. And the last chapter in there is the work ahead. Again, looking towards the future. So I'm trying to support people and organizations working in conservation everywhere, in government, out of government. I'm trying to take an integrative overview, a long view, and to look at the present complexity we're all faced with and how to deal with that. At this point, I want to make a people acknowledgement. Yellowstone was designated over 150 years ago. And there have been many human beings, thousands of them over multiple generations, working to preserve what we have here now. The American people many times over has reaffirmed the importance of this region. It's a great national public good and a global public good. We are now at a time in history, 150 plus years later, where all of that is in doubt due to global problems, national problems, and regional problems. And we cannot abandon that legacy for the next generation. So we reaffirmed our commitment to the Yellowstone region through world wars, depressions, and all kinds of crises. And we need to take that commitment seriously. Today, there are many thousands of people, some in this room, in government, NGOs, and others, out there working to preserve that legacy. So the two questions I want to raise are, how are we going to use GYE and who's deciding? That's true in all your cases. These, I argue, are the two key questions we're grappling with in whatever way we do our work and think and talk. So let's see how these two questions are being answered. And in 5 slides, I'm going to show you some pictures. This is concrete stuff. Not airy fairy theory, not whatever. This is what the 5 million or so tourists who come here every year, the hundreds of thousands of people who live here, including all the decision makers, all of us, these are the consequences. This is the downside of the consequences. The indirect and direct impacts on wildlife are horrendous. You don't get in your car anytime and go out and say, I want to run over a grizzly bear. That doesn't happen. But it does happen inadvertently. More concrete answers due to crowding, especially this one in the lower right-hand corner here. Todd Wilkinson talked about it as a rampant development on all the private lands. Bob talked about that too. Those private lands are low elevation and some of the critical wildlife habitat. All the migrations Arthur talked about either go through there or end up there. And the 20 counties who control that private land development are not necessarily on board for GYE conservation. So yesterday, Superintendent Jenkins again he talked about all the upside gains we have made. And those are real gains, and they should be celebrated. And the people who caused them should be celebrated. You can read this yourself, but at a recent congressional hearing up in the park, just about a week or two back, Superintendent Jenkins said visitor numbers are ballooning, crowds are pushing further back into the park, more people are floating the river, climbing mountains, and wanting off-road and backcountry experiences. Trail use is up 25%. At the same time, Congress wants more and more and more and more of that. So I'm real sympathetic to the position people like Jenkins find themselves in. Is what is he supposed to do? One of the presenters at that same congressional hearing, Taylor Phillips, who was here yesterday, they said, visitors come here to see park wildlife and intact ecosystem, not gas stations. So as we commodify and commercialize the region, we get more gas stations. So another partial answer to those two questions is by Andy Hansen, a professor at Montana State University. 10 years ago, he did a big study, which he called Vital Signs, looked at 35 vital signs in the ecosystem and concluded that GY is undergoing fairly massive increasing human effects and also climate change. Many of those 35 variables he looked at are in decline. Things like fresh water on the margin of the ecosystem. You can see in this central figure here, the kind of maroon and blue are private lands that are either already developed or being developed. And that's increasing almost exponentially. So here in Jackson, the dominant discussion is how we can make more houses. As well, the temperature's going up and water's going down. The next slide is from Professor Keiter, whom we just heard from. He's been in the business here for a long time. His most recent book, Conserving Nature in Greater Yellowstone, I highly recommend everybody read that. His conclusion, which he presented in a slideshow, is that we face a jurisdictional fragmentation problem. So not about antelope, not about grizzly bears. It's an institutional problem, an organizational problem, a cultural problem. And it's causing great difficulty in getting us all on the same page. What he also said, if I understood it correctly, we're working piece by piece, issue by issue over the last 50 years through the courts and in other ways, including science and advocacy. But we're making progress, some at least. But much more needs to be done. So the next question is, which is kind of a problem definition of sorts. So what is the problem we really face? Can we articulate it in a way that is tractable? Or do we just keep throwing ourselves at the complexity and do the best job we can? So the question is, what future are we now making for GYE and ourselves? If we look 25 years in the future, you know what this place is going to look like? Yes. If current trends and conditions persist. So the challenge before all of us, as I see it, is this. How can we reimagine GYE's future through forward-looking collaboration that strengthens our civic fabric and conservation ethics? Give me a second. That's one way to say the big picture. But we're working through cases, but we're hoping we're working towards that end. So some trade-offs and consequences here now. You should be able to see pretty clearly, especially from Professor Keiter's talk, how we're answering those two questions. How we're using the system and who's deciding. Currently, there are many special interests, private interests, state and federal interests, competing for how we're going to use this place and who gets to decide. This is an example that goes back a few years. There's a small bighorn sheep population in the south end of the Tetons. And in one public hearing, a man stood up and said this: I don't care about bighorn sheep conservation. They had their chance over the last 1,000 years. It's my turn now. I just want to ski. So what do you do when tens of thousands of people like that show up in a region like this? It was not about wildlife. So now I want to turn quickly to, in a moment, a few recommendations. But in terms of trade-offs and consequences, Todd Wilkinson, whom we heard from yesterday, has written decades worth of literature through his journalism about the consequences and trade-offs of what we're doing in this region. It's multiple decades worth of very high quality reporting. His conclusion is the first essential step is to admit we're approaching limits of consumption and use. If you look over here, you see the illustration he showed yesterday of the population growth, which is expanding dramatically in the region. If you look below, he focused on development of private lands, which are the subject of that book over there. And what are we going to do about that? So as a journalist, his job is to bring the facts to the public as he understands them. And he's done a great job in doing that. So humans living anywhere, especially if the numbers and uses are mushrooming out of proportion, are exceeding often the ecological function of the region with huge negative consequences. And how are we going to come to grips with that? So this is an example about how we frame and bound not only what we do, but how we think about it and our relationship to nature. And it's a topic a lot of people don't think about. In Teton County here, our county has great goals to preserve the ecological integrity and retain community character. Those goals were set years ago. But I will make the case virtually every decision we're making now are guaranteeing those goals will never be met. For those of you who don't know, that's called goal drift, goal inversion, or goal displacement. If you don't know those terms and concepts, Google them, because that's happening all over, unfortunately. And we need to be able to recognize that problem and address it. So the next slide is by a senior federal official who chose to be anonymous, who's been working in the system for over 50 years. And he said, official cooperation in GYE is broken. So it's not just about the good half of the story, it's also about the bad half and the reality of the situation. And he argued the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee, which is the highest, most authoritative organization we have, due to its congressionally mandated direction, is not configured and not authorized to deal with the full ecosystem, only part of it, largely the federal lands. And he also said many official meetings are largely performative. So part of my argument is how can we come to grips with what's really going on here and deal with it responsibly? So in summary here, whoops. As we look to the future, the Wildlife Subcommittee, the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee, a few years ago said this. Essentially, just over the next 25 years, we're talking about ecosystem shifts in GYE with the landscape changing to conditions we have never seen before. It's easy to assume what we see today and experienced in the past is going to continue. This and other evidence suggests it's not. It's easy to look at a nice, clean black and white map like that and things are clean and simple and pretty, but they're not. Bob talked about how immensely complex governance and how we live in this region are. So 10 years ago, I'm sorry. So I hear we have three kinds of problems here and they're all intermixed. The first is the practical trade-offs, which are largely ecological and physical, which we've talked a lot about in the last few days. We also have governance trade-offs, which is about decision-making and social process. And we also have cultural trade-offs about human conduct and how we humans want to live in a place like this. So we did a 10-year study on elk management around here, interviewing lots and lots of people over 10 years. 100% of those people saw the first kind of problem, the ecological practical trade-offs. Only 35% understood the governance problem, and only 17% understood the cultural problem. So part of my thesis is we need to focus and gear up and put more understanding into what's going on government-wise, governance-wise, not government, two different things, and culturally, what we're doing here. And we're not going to solve a lot of these practical trade-off questions until we deal with these two. And my question is, are we equipped to do that? So I want to turn to 4 recommendations out of 20 I might make, because there's so limited time here. And I realize everything I'm talking about or alluding to requires much more conversation. And I will admit I don't have the answers, but I'm perfectly willing to be part of the discussion. So the first recommendation is, what are the best practices? So I heard all the cases from around the world here. You guys are talking about your best practices. It would be really worthwhile if we could spend a day or two extracting those and distilling them and comparing them across all these cases. That's learning at a higher level, which is what we need to do. So in this system, Mike Whitfield and the high divide, which Professor Keiter talked about, is considered a best practice. What's he doing? You can go ask him, you can go see for yourself. We could write it down, have a list of best practices and give them to everybody. So Jason Ballas, who was to be here, but couldn't come, he's restoring buffalo on the Wind River Indian Reservation. That's considered a good thing too. And there are people in this room right now, in the agencies and otherwise, NGOs and others, who are doing best practices. I don't want to point them out and embarrass them, but they could be on this slide just as well. So what are all these people doing? Would it be possible for us to sit down for a couple of days and extract from all your cases what the best practices are? Print them up and send them around? Because all we want people to do is do what they're doing. It's not about theory, not about changing anything. Find out what they're doing and just say do more of it, and reward that. And what we're looking for is transferable best practices. So the second recommendation, we need to sit down and think about where we're going. No, we do not have in this region any forward map of the future, given trends and conditions. We can make one. There's places afloat in science data and social data and environmental data. We need to organize it into a map of where we seem to be going. And we need to ask ourselves, do we want to go there? So given everything Professor Keiter talked about and Todd Wilkinson talked about, all these processes and events and things are in process. And they're taking us somewhere. Do we really want to go there? So we should do what's called developmental constructs, scenarios, future mapping. It's not a prediction. It's just everything we know now and our best guess of what's coming. Then we can ask ourselves, do we want to go there? Some people think we're massively losing ground. So again, the question is, what is the future of GUI in nature if it fills up with humans in a region like this? Which takes us back to the big question, are we thinking big enough? And I would argue the answer is no. That is the missing conversation that we need to have with ourselves. Third recommendation, which Arthur Middleton talked about migrations and Thompson talked about large carnivores. These are great, they capture everybody's interest and attention. These are great opportunities to learn forward. And my question is, are we prototyping in an inventive, forward-looking way enough to preserve these migrations in large carnivores? My guess is probably not now, but they are huge opportunities for learning. Like in the big 9 migrations in and around Yellowstone, it'd be interesting to put a team on each of those and say, what's the best you can do? Then start comparing across those teams so we can find out what best practices are and transfer them to other cases that are not up to speed. We're now about 1,000 grizzly bears, and it's only taken 50 years and 50 million plus bucks. That's a half a century. We may very well have peaked out on the numbers of bears we're ever going to have in this region. The fourth recommendation, or the last slide, is about leadership. Leadership is always important, but grassroots and rank and file are equally important. But leadership often has access to resources and authority and other things the rest of us don't have. We are now largely using a model of leadership called administrative management. Keep the ship afloat. Make sure the toilets work, the sewer systems work, roads work, and all that. I would suggest what we need is a new model of leadership called transformative leadership. And there's a lot of literature over here. This is just a handbook on transformative learning. We know what's to be transformed and we know how to do it. But we should start using that here as we go forward. So we need strategic skills to do that. We need to think in terms of what we call grand strategy. So I've been teaching at Yale for 5 years what grand strategy is. That's part of the missing conversation here. Dr. Keiter referred to that as well. We're not on the same page. So we need to work more on governance and cultural problems in addition to the ordinary ecological problems and trade-offs. And what we're trying to do is lead towards kind of adaptive governance. I recommended reading Professor Keiter's book. I highly recommend you read this adaptive governance book that lays out the argument. That's very different from what we're doing now, but it capitalizes on all the good things we're doing now and magnifies them. What's the justification for what I've said? Cam Sholey, Superintendent of Yellowstone, said it many years ago. The human race, I believe very strongly, is only as rich as its desire to save its natural wonders for future generations to experience, enjoy, and to learn from. So my basic argument is we need to kind of bootstrap ourselves into better practices at multiple levels and think big enough to meet the real challenges we're facing and not just depend and look backward on our accomplishments. So the last slide is we're going to need better concepts, words, organizations, and action if we're going to realistically deal with the challenges that we face. So we need to work together, as John talked about, and many others. And so we must build pragmatic hope in today's climate of high anxiety and low morale. We can all do that, especially leadership. So this illustration kind of lays out the challenge before us, which is about ourselves. Thank you.
It's okay. I think we have time for a couple questions if anybody has one.
So those are all fabulous presentations. Benoit, I'm glad you mentioned the roads and the poaching. We saw the same thing in Africa. With new mines comes new roads, as Justine pointed out, and it all ended up in China. So Justine, when you mentioned the new roads for the new mines, are you seeing an increase in poaching as well?
Thank you. That's a good question. Most of the roads are actually going to the border with China to the south, because the trade is primarily with China in the south. Poaching of wild ungulates has actually decreased. We've been monitoring number of trade and the population itself, and Hulan populations are increasing. Other populations are also potentially increasing, and I think that's due to the patrolling efforts and preventive efforts and the less local use of wildlife as well. There's been a shift in the last 10 years. Mongolia also recently established an eco-police, so there's increased enforcement at the national level, and everyone's pretty aware which species are highly protected. So there's more awareness. So I think Mongolia, there used to be rampant poaching, and that used to be the main threat for most of the species, but that's changed. I think Mongolia is more of a transit country now for trade. So we need better regulations on managing trade of non-resident species because other species are moving through the trade. Yeah.
My question's for Susan. Susan, I really enjoyed your presentation. I mean, I remember once, I think those of us who work in conservation really struggle because we want people to come enjoy these places. And we feel like that builds support for conserving them. And yet, as you put it, people mean pollution, right? That's just a fact. And to put out something concrete Do you think potentially one solution in Yellowstone would be to end cars and create a bus system like they have done in Denali?
A partial answer to that complex question. You just describe a paradox, and we're all trapped in these paradoxes. What are the trade-offs and consequences? And the real answer to that is not my answer. I may have a preference. My answer is we got to come to grips with those kind of paradoxes. And we're not organized very well to do that. It's pretty clear if you've been here very long, the volume of traffic in Yellowstone and Grand Teton grossly distracts from the opportunity and the personal experience of being in those places. And I don't have an optimal answer for that. And the answer's got to come from all of us, sort of, not just me. But we're going to have to come to grips with that one, that particular issue, and many, many more soon.
I've got a question for you, Susan, and for your panelists. You know, one of the great things about attending a conference like this is there's a lot of really bright, dedicated people, whether in government or working for NGOs. And we have this accumulated knowledge that's obvious and it's right before us. And Arthur talks about a vision, and it's, you know, a vision that's been needed forever. Everybody in this room acknowledges that we need a vision, but vision is like a taboo word, like zoning or talking about things. And so my question is, why is it in our democracy where we can talk and not get killed for speaking our minds, why is it that so many civil servants, scientists are afraid to be able to speak up or feel fearful of doing that? And, you know, there's top-down pressure that begins in Washington and it comes all the way. So the kind of conversation, the level that we need to have that rewards courage and bold visionary thinking, as you describe, it can't happen. And all of us in this room know that it needs to happen. So what's the trigger for it happening, and who provides the leadership?
All I can do is try to respond generally to that. So science is always needed, the more the better, but we're always in short supply. So what we are witnessing now, I would argue, in our culture is a shutdown of the intelligence function across the entire culture, where there's less and less scientific and other kinds of data coming out of research institutes and scientists, so the American public can see all of that. So not only are we shutting down the intelligence function across the country in many fields, like, for example, there's great inventory and monitoring work in the Yellowstone system. None of it really sees daylight. That's just an example of the shutting down of the intelligence function. But the other functions of the decision process are being weakened too. Like the next one is, let's discuss it. So the forums in which we can democratically discuss what it is we think we know are becoming less and less and dominated by fractionated ideologies, non-democratic discussion. So through the full decision process, we are in a situation where we are closing down intelligence, discussion, decision-making, implementation, evaluation, and what we need to do. And we just happen to be living in this time, which is not good.